There's a pattern that hollows out nations from the inside. It's not a military defeat. It's the systematic destruction of the middle class. It's a 5-stage process, and it has played out with chilling precision in the Roman Republic, Weimar Germany, and modern Argentina. It happened to the legionary farmers of Rome, the backbone of the entire republican system. It happened to the educated professionals of Germany, whose life savings were turned into worthless paper. And it happened to the proud middle class of Argentina, a nation once richer than most of Europe, who were wiped out by a series of repeating crises. Each of them believed their society was exceptional. Each believed their future was secure. They were wrong. The destruction of the middle class is never a single event. It is a sequence. A slow decay that rots a nation from its core, leaving it fragile and ready for implosion. Today, we're dissecting that 5-stage pattern. We're going from ancient Rome to 1920s Berlin to modern Buenos Aires, not for a history lesson, but to find a blueprint for collapse. And as we go through each stage, from the deceptive boom to the final, desperate implosion, you may start seeing that we're not just looking at the past. We are looking in a mirror. Because the 5th and final stage is a warning we cannot afford to ignore. Number 1. The blueprint of ruin. The pattern isn't complicated. In fact, its simplicity is what makes it so terrifying and so easy for governments to fall into, time and time again. Think of it as a 7-stage cycle of wealth destruction that has been the silent killer of empires. Understanding this is like getting a map of the past and a disturbing prophecy for our future. It always starts with an almost invisible sin. Stage 1. Excessive government spending. The empire is powerful, dominant, maybe a little arrogant. It starts spending on everything: grand projects, endless wars, sprawling social programs. Its ambitions get bigger than its wallet. The treasury starts to bleed money, slowly at first, and then, all at once. This leads right to stage 2. Money printing. A government drowning in red ink has 2 choices: raise taxes and admit it screwed up, or just create new money out of thin air. It almost always picks the second option. In Rome, this meant debasing their silver coins. Today, it's a few keystrokes on a central bank's computer. The technology changes, but the crime is the same. Then comes the poison. Stage 3. Initial inflation. More money starts chasing the same amount of stuff, so prices have to rise. It's subtle at first. You feel a pinch at the market, but you adjust. The government calls it transitory, but it's not. It's a slow, creeping tax on every single person who holds that nation's currency. Soon, people notice the lie. That brings us to stage 4. Acceleration of inflation. People realize the money in their bank account is losing value every single day. So they do the logical thing. They rush to spend it. They try to trade their dying currency for real assets, land, a house, anything solid. But this frantic spending just throws gasoline on the fire, pushing prices up even faster. The poison is no longer creeping. It's a torrent. This is the tipping point into stage 5. Hyperinflation. The final stage of trust is gone. The currency becomes a hot potato. Nobody wants to hold it. Price increases become insane. This is where the savings of the middle class aren't just reduced. They are annihilated. A lifetime of work can be wiped out in a matter of months. As the chaos boils over, the authorities panic. This kicks off stage 6. The system freeze. To stop a total meltdown, the government imposes desperate, iron-fisted controls. They limit how much cash you can withdraw. They block money from leaving the country, and they might even roll out a new currency and force you to use it. The free economy grinds to a halt. The system is broken, and nobody trusts it. And finally, the end of the line. Stage 7. Monetary system breakdown. The currency is dead. The economic engine has seized. People might go back to barter. The great wealth transfer is complete. From the wage earners and savers in the middle class to the politically connected and those who owned hard assets from the start, the social fabric, stretched to its breaking point, finally rips apart. This leads to political extremism, revolution, or just the final quiet decay of a once great power. This is the blueprint. 7 stages. From Rome to today. And to really understand it, we have to start where the script was first written. Stage 2. The seeds of inequality. No golden age lasts. Stage 2 is unraveling. It's slow, almost invisible at first. The prosperity that once lifted many begins to flow upwards, concentrating into fewer and fewer hands. The rules of the game begin to change in ways that benefit the powerful at the expense of the middle. This isn't the crisis yet. It's the quiet hollowing out. The gap between the ultra-wealthy and everyone else widens. The seeds of collapse are sown here. In the Roman Republic, the unraveling was a direct result of its military success. The citizen soldiers were sent on longer campaigns abroad. While they were gone, their small farms fell into neglect, unable to compete with cheap grain imported from conquered provinces. The ultra-wealthy elite, enriched by war spoils, saw an opportunity. They bought up these struggling farms and consolidated them into massive slave-run estates called latifundia. These weren't family farms. They were industrial-scale cash crop operations that crushed the remaining small farmers. The result was a catastrophe. The independent Roman farmer, the backbone of the Republic, was systematically displaced, flocking to Rome as a landless urban mob. Wealth became fantastically concentrated. The middle class was being squeezed out of existence. In Weimar Germany, the unraveling was hidden beneath the surface of the Golden Twenties. That prosperity was built on a mountain of foreign debt, making the economy incredibly vulnerable. But the deeper problem was the psychological scar from the 1921-1923 hyperinflation. It had vaporized the savings of the middle class. A lifetime of work, worthless. Meanwhile, the well-connected, those with hard assets or foreign currency, weathered the storm and even profited. This created a lasting sense of resentment. The system felt rigged. Even during the good years of the mid-20s, the benefits flowed disproportionately to large industries and financiers. There was a feeling that the rules had been broken and that the middle class had been cheated. This was a wound that never healed. For Argentina, the path to unraveling was its own success. The export-driven economy created immense wealth, but it was narrow. Power was concentrated in a small landowning oligarchy. Throughout the mid-20th century, this created a volatile boom and bust cycle. During booms, the middle class felt prosperous. But when the busts inevitably came, often triggered by a fall in commodity prices, their gains were wiped out by inflation and currency devaluation. The wealthy elite could protect their assets by moving them into dollars offshore. The middle class, with their savings and salaries in pesos, had no escape. They were trapped. Each crisis pushed more of them down the ladder. The system that built their prosperity was now strangling them. Stage 3. Crisis and the Great Wipeout Stage 3 is where the slow decay accelerates into a full-blown, catastrophic collapse. This is the shock, the event that cracks the society's underlying weaknesses wide open. A war, a financial crash, a political decision. The result is the same: the rapid and brutal destruction of middle-class wealth. This is the wipeout. For the Roman Republic, the shock was a century of escalating chaos and civil war. Political order broke down. Prescriptions under generals like Sulla saw the state-sanctioned murder and seizure of property from thousands of citizens, many from the upper middle classes. Personal wealth was no longer secure. Alongside this came the economic shock, currency debasement. To pay their armies, Roman leaders began to systematically reduce the silver content in their coins, mixing it with cheaper metals. The result was rampant inflation. Prices for goods soared. The money the middle class had saved was losing value by the day. Debasement was a hidden tax, a way for the state to steal the wealth of its citizens. The political and monetary crises fed each other, creating a vortex of destruction. Check. In Weimar Germany, the shock was one of the most infamous economic events in history, the hyperinflation of 1923. To pay striking workers, the government lit the fuse on an economic bomb by printing money on an industrial scale. The German mark ceased to have meaning. Prices rose hourly. A loaf of bread that cost 163 marks in 1922 cost 200 billion marks by late 1923. The concept of savings became absurd, a lifetime of middle-class security, gone in months. Then, after a deceptive recovery, came the second hammer blow, the Great Depression in 1929. The American loans propping up the German economy were called in. The system imploded. Businesses failed, banks collapsed, and unemployment skyrocketed. The shock of 1923 destroyed their past. The shock of 1929 destroyed their future. Check. For Argentina, the Great Wipeout was a recurring nightmare, but the most acute shock came in 2001. After years of unsustainable debt, the system broke. The government implemented the infamous corralito. It froze all bank accounts. Imagine waking up to find your life savings trapped behind a wall you cannot penetrate. Panic and fury erupted. Then, the government defaulted on its massive foreign debt and abandoned the currency peg to the US dollar. The peso's value plummeted, and the remaining value of people's trapped savings was decimated overnight. The middle class was hollowed out. Professionals were seen scavenging for recyclables. The social fabric ripped apart. It was a moral and social collapse. The promise of security had been annihilated. In Rome, Weimar, and Argentina, the story is the same. The shock arrives, and the wealth of the middle class is sacrificed to pay soldiers, to service debt, to save the system. It is a massive, traumatic transfer of wealth that leaves the middle class broken and furious. Stage 4. The loss of faith, the inevitable political consequence of Stage 3. Having been economically wiped out, the middle class undergoes a psychological transformation. Their belief in the system, its institutions, its leaders, its laws, is shattered. This is the betrayal. The social contract has been broken, and the middle class, once the staunchest defender of the established order, now turns against it. They become radicalized, desperate for a savior or a scapegoat. Their faith is gone. In Rome, the people lost all faith in the Senate, correctly seeing it as a corrupt institution run by the same oligarchs who had stolen their land and devalued their money. This created a vacuum for populist strongmen. First, the Gracchi brothers, who tried to pass land reforms and were murdered for it. The lesson was learned. Politics was now about force, not law. The people then placed their loyalty not in the Republic, but in generals who promised them land and money, men like Marius, and ultimately, Julius Caesar. The Republic had betrayed them, so they threw their support behind the men who would tear it down. In Weimar Germany, the sense of betrayal was even more acute. The middle class, the Mittelstand, valued order and stability. The Weimar Republic, in their eyes, delivered only chaos, humiliation, and ruin. Democracy became synonymous with failure. They felt ignored, caught between powerful industrialists and organized communists. Into this void stepped the extremist parties, particularly the Nazis. Hitler's message was surgically tailored to the grievances of the ruined middle class. he promised to smash the democratic system, restore order, and he offered them scapegoats. For a class that had lost everything, this was an intoxicating message. The Nazi Party's vote share surged. They had lost faith in democracy, and now they cast their vote for the man who promised to burn it all down. In Argentina, the 2001 crisis triggered a complete collapse of political legitimacy. The public's fury wasn't at one politician, but at the entire establishment. The chant that echoed through the streets was a primal scream of rejection. Que se vayan todos! All of them must go. This expressed a profound sense of betrayal built over decades. The people felt generations of politicians, from military juntas to Democrats, from right to left, had lied to them and stolen from them. The corralito was the final insult. This loss of faith was absolute, creating a polarized and unstable political landscape that persists to this day. The betrayal broke the bond between the Argentine people and their state: Rome, Weimar, Argentina. 3 different eras, one identical outcome. When the middle class is betrayed, they cease to be the guardians of the system. They become its most determined gravediggers. Stage 5. Authoritarianism and the New Order. This is the end game. Stage 5 is the collapse of the old order. The economic hollowing out, the social unraveling, and the political betrayal all culminate here. The institutions, the Senate, the Republic, the democratic constitution, can no longer hold. They are swept away, and something new, almost always more authoritarian, takes their place. In Rome, the collapse was a series of brutal civil wars that ended when Julius Caesar's heir, Octavian, defeated his rivals. In 27 BC, he restored the Republic, but it was a restoration in name only. He kept the old titles, but concentrated all real power in his own hands. He became Augustus, Rome's first emperor. The Republic was dead. The Empire was born. The independent middle class was gone, replaced by a bureaucracy serving the emperor. They had traded liberty for what they craved most after a century of chaos: stability. The Pax Romana was built on the grave of the Republic. In Germany, the collapse was terrifyingly swift. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor. Within months, the Nazis used the Reichstag fire as a pretext to suspend all civil liberties. The Enabling Act gave Hitler dictatorial powers. All other political parties were banned. The Weimar Republic was dead. The Third Reich was born. The middle class that had helped vote him into power was absorbed into the totalitarian state. Their independent power was gone. They were cogs in a machine, their security dependent on absolute loyalty to the regime. They gambled on an authoritarian savior and annihilated themselves as a free class. In Argentina, the 2001 collapse didn't result in a single dictator, but instead inaugurated a new and dysfunctional normal. The country cycled through 5 presidents in 2 weeks. Institutional chaos was total. Though formal democracy returned, the crisis solidified a pattern of economic dysfunction, political polarization, and permanent precarity. While there have been brief periods of partial recovery during commodity booms, these gains are consistently wiped out by the next crisis. The collapse wasn't a one-time transition. It was the transition to a state of permanent, managed decay. The old Argentine dream of first world prosperity was shattered. They didn't get an emperor. They got a broken system that institutionalized the very crisis that destroyed them. Whether it ends with an emperor, a dictator, or a state of permanent crisis, Stage 5 is the final stop. The middle class, the vital center, is gone. The wipeout is complete. So what does this journey tell us? It tells us that the middle class is more than an economic category. It is the connective tissue of a healthy society, the buffer between rich and poor, the believers who invest in the future, the guardians of stability. The five-stage pattern we've traced through Rome, Weimar, and Argentina is a timeless warning. It shows how prosperity curdles into inequality, how inequality breeds a crisis of wealth, how that crisis of wealth leads to a crisis of faith, and how a crisis of faith opens the door to authoritarianism and collapse. The specifics change. It might be slave-run estates, a printing press running hot, or a frozen bank account. But the pattern remains eerily consistent. It is a story of the hollowing out of the middle. And so we are left with a final, unsettling question. As we look around our own world today, with its rising inequality, its soaring debts, its volatile economies, and its growing political polarization, we must ask, in which stage of this five-stage pattern do we find ourselves now? The pattern is mathematical. You cannot hollow out the middle without consequences. The sequence is locked in. The only question is timing. If this analysis of historical patterns opened your eyes to where we are in the sequence, subscribe. Because when the next stages hit, you'll want to understand what happened and why. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past. Thank you for watching.